Hello and welcome. Today we are talking about the continent Africa on the back of the summit that's just ended in the United States of America. Obviously showing an interest in coming to Africa more, lending more of a hand, helping us more, whichever way you want to put it. But the undertone we hear is that we're becoming more democratic. Indeed, Africa is rising. 10 out of the 10 fastest economies in the world are all in Africa. And so then you ask, why are we then sat in Washington, D.C. seeking for help? 54 countries independent, nearly 1 billion people living in an area of about 30 million mile square. And 99% of all the chrome in the world is here. 85% of all the platinum in the world is here. 70% of all the tantalite in the world is here. Now, tantalite is like an aluminium agent that strengthens steel. So you need it in your mobile phones, your surgical equipment, and it's all here. 68% of cobalt is in Africa. 54% of gold is in Africa. And I can go on and on and on and on. And so you then ask yourself, why is the continent stricken with disease, poverty, and bad stories? Which is which? Are we growing or are we not? When I come back, I'll introduce my guest. My name is Nana Sakwao, and this is PM Express. Africa, democracy, and security, and that's what we're going to discuss today. And who else will discuss such a subject? I'll start from my immediate left. My senior brother, Dr. Vladimir Nchidanso, international relations expert. Doctor, you're welcome.
Thank you.
And thank you too. And then to my far left, my own brother, Ibad Ibrahim, international news and security analyst. And he's becoming, acclaimed, and well done.
Thank you so much. I'm humbled by the kind words, but I'm still undergoing tutelage. And I'm humbled to sit with the doc. Yeah.
Well, let me give you a message on there, because I was flying to Accra from Kumasi Airport. So this elderly man approaches me and says, "Oh, Nana, I watch your program, so thank you very much." He said, "Well, you bring this young man, he's very eloquent." I said, "Oh, yeah." He says, "Tell him not to be corrupted, because I can tell he's not corrupted yet. So make sure he doesn't get corrupted." I said, "I will tell him." So maybe he'll be watching and he knows I've delivered the message.
Thank you so much. And thank you for relaying the message.
You're welcome.
Yeah.
Doc, let me start with you. Nearly 50 heads of states in Africa meet in the U.S. To be told that they're doing well in terms of democracy. Africa is growing. Some of the fastest economies, are in Africa. Should we believe these things? Is it just political talk, or there's something that we don't know?
Well, thank you. I think a very good evening to your viewers. The U.S.-Africa Summit has attracted a lot of commentary. And so because of the very questions you are posing, should we believe what we are being told? The Africa Rising mantra. 17 African countries are doing so well. More than 10 of them, running between 10 and 14% GDP growth. Eloquent testimonies about the Africa we know today against the Africa we knew yesterday. But personally, if you ask me, I'll tell you the summit was not because of these stories. If I want to talk to you, I've got to tell the good story before you listen to me. I wouldn't think that the Africans would have loved to hear those bad things and then they would just walk to the U.S. To listen to whatever it is again. So yes, they've got to tell us all those good stories, some of which are very true anyway. We've gone a long way. Democracy since 1989 has started some kind of Jackie strikes in Africa. GDP growth has been phenomenal and things like that. But is it growth with development or growth without development? These are some of the issues that we need to ask. The summit agenda and the philosophy, everything would show that, yes, America has a big interest. And if you allow me to go straight ahead, I'll tell you that the interest, threefold. One, America doesn't want to be undone by the BRICS, specifically China. America seems to be on the curve, while China is on the getting close to the, what do you call it, the home stretch. So America needs to do some catch-up. Number two, Obama needs to leave a legacy. In his second term of office, he needs to leave a legacy. And so it behoves him to kind of bring the Africans together and do something. Thirdly, and most importantly, is the question of U.S. security. The U.S. seems to be losing both Europe, Eurasia, and the Arab world. Where else do we tend to? Got to be very careful not to have almost every part of the world having put you in some security concerns. And Africa is a place where if you do not take care, what will come out of Africa will be worse than in Afghanistan or things like that, where the U.S. will have to spend much. So Obama has to do that. And finally, I think that is at the bottom of the whole thing, is this economic kind of thing. That, look, Africa is rising. The data shows that we have not less than 350 million middle-class people. Out of the about 1 billion that you mentioned, 350 million middle class, you got to tap it. And you tap it for American investment. American entrepreneurs will have to tap into it, not allowing only the Chinese to do that. So this basically informs why the summit, I believe. And maybe we'll also have to benefit from it. As Zuma and others are commenting on it, you could see that they are so happy that the whole thing happened, because those thematic areas and the assistance that were promised are such that it will help Africa too.
I'd like to pick, things that were promised. Now, Congo is sitting on 24 trillion amount of wealth. Yeah. And it's like, apparently the GDP of USA and the whole of Europe put together. And they are sat on there begging for carbon-based stakes. I mean, should we not be having our own meetings in a different way by now?
Nana, I think normally, unfortunately, with the mere mention of the word Africa evokes an imagery of war, famine, dictatorships, and all that. But if you do a decade-on-decade assessment, you realize that this current century holds a lot of promise for the continent. Because, for example, when you look at the last decade of the 20th century, I think the continent witnessed some tectonic shifts in its political landscape. Ghana became a multi-party democracy in '92. By 1999, Nigeria had joined the caravan, and in between, apartheid was abolished in South Africa and all that. But within the same decade under review, Nana, unfortunately, we are a continent of ambivalence, where the pendulum of progress and retrogression seems to be swinging in both directions. Within the same period, Nana, there was a genocide in 1994 that cost the lives of about 800,000 people. Then there were the residual elements of the violence we saw in Sierra Leone and Liberia as well. So we seem to be making one step forward and moving 2 steps backwards. But that notwithstanding, I think politically, the enlightenment that has been created should be able to create that enabling, conducive environment for us to kickstart an exponential development with so much need. Nana, I talk politics because politics is the bedrock upon which the development of this continent rests. Because when you look at 1960 to 1990, on average, there were 20 coup d'etats on the continent. But that number has been slashed in half. So we've done well, but I think we should do better than we are doing currently. Because for as long as we have that political will and that collective interest of the people, the general masses, then certainly we wouldn't be traveling to the States and other countries cup in hand, regardless of the myriad resources, the pools of resources many African countries sit upon. So therefore, I think when we even go there, Nana, it's not a negative thing entirely. That's right. Because at the end of the day, you will rake in some benefits. But I would want our leaders to consider our engagement with our Western partners not as a humanitarian form of advocacy, but it should rather be an investment allure. So the lofty things you've mentioned, the titanium, the silicon we have and all that. They say Silicon Valley is not only in the United States of America. There are certain African countries that are awash with such important precious metals. So therefore, we should be able to have that political will, just as Doc indicated. And then number 2, we should be able to learn to fish rather than being given fish all the time. So our engagement with the white people, the white folk, should be based upon an even playing field of mutual respect and mutual benefit. So it wouldn't be like a master-servant kind of relationship, which we've seen in the past few decades.
No, you see, the politics, we've moved ahead in decade-by-decade analysis. But is that the right sort of politics for us? Because they're very concerned. I mean, the white guys, oh yes, that's the democracy you have to do. You know, spend millions, elect a president and tell him that 4 years you're coming back for the power and I promise to God he's going to do the best things for you. I mean...
Unfortunately, the parameters used in measuring our progress in democracy are all wrong parameters. Of course, there are basic tenets of democracy. When we talk of good governance, and democracy is not universal and everywhere. I mean, British democracy is not the same as Indian democracy, nor is Indian democracy the same as American democracy, etc., etc. Unfortunately, leadership deficit in Africa is not helping us to create our own kind of lines where the basic tenets of democracy basic tenets of democracy will be present, whilst our good governance is skewed towards our needs. We say democracy is expensive. Democracy is hiccuping badly in Africa because once you get a constitution, you spell out Bill of Rights, you say there are checks and balances, and the West says, hooray, that country is a democracy. Didn't we have that democracy in the DR Congo, in Sierra Leone, everywhere? But it's like beyond these basic things, good governance enjoins us to do other things other than, let me take our own Ghana, the whole of Africa generally. Well, tribalism is negative when it comes to wars and that kind of thing. It's the same negativity that we use on democracy, because instead of making sure that the tribe stays and tribalism dies, we use tribalism to get our democracy going. We do it. We have our World Bank and whatever. Kind of.
And Florida.
And it's everywhere. In Uganda, it's there. In Nigeria, it's there. And that is our history. We cannot run away from it. That the white man put us together. Over 400 and something tribes in Nigeria put together with thousands of dialects and to be called Nigeria. 57 tribes in Ghana put together to be called Ghana. It's because of our leadership to be able to garner that courage and be able to put us together as Ghanaians first. But we rather want to use Ewes, Ashantis, Dagombas, and whatnot for our politics, which satisfies the kind of things that the white man has given us. So you're right. The point is this, that, yes, they've given us the platform. What do we do with that platform, looking at where we are coming from and where we want to go? That's what South Africa is trying to do. That's what Mandela tried to tell everybody. We look at where we're coming from. And therefore, the 1994 constitution that was promulgated in 1996 to usher him in was a constitution that talks about the past, the present, and where we want to go. We don't do that in most parts of Africa. So for me, the question of why we are unable to move the way we should move is precisely because of the clash of a kind of civilization, not in the terms of East-West kind of this thing, but a clash. Yes, the tribe is here in America. Everybody says I'm an American. I used to have a family friend. I had a family which is friendly. I'm a friend to the family, and the man was born in Kentucky. The woman is from Boston, and the woman is from New York, and their little girl daughter says he's a Bostonian. Boston. He was born in Boston. Can you imagine? You know, that's the beauty of it. That they are Americans first and foremost. Where you were born is where your hometown is. You know, the other time I was teasing my girlfriends that my children were born in Accra, so they are Ghans. I say, you know. So that is the thing. What do we make of what we have and its leadership?
And then, Nana, I agree perfectly with Doc that the parameters are quite flawed. Yes. When you use certain benchmarks that are not universal in their outlooks, then at the end of the day, it's not all European countries that are doing fairly well. The people in Hungary as many African people here. And then Moldova isn't looking any good.
That's right.
Moldova is an impoverished country. About 58% of the youth there die as a result of drunkenness and all that. So we shouldn't allow BBC, the CNN, and other cable news networks to accentuate those negative aspects of Africa. We should be able to tell our own success stories. But if the stream of information is a one-way traffic, from the West, when someone is traveling to the States, he says, I'm going uptown. But anybody who is coming down to Africa says, I'm flying down to Africa. So our psyche, our mentality, what we have is down. It is mediocre. It is not up to standard. But what is over there is up. So therefore, I think there needs to be a complete overhaul of our thinking. The leadership deficit has to be fixed. Because if you judge democracy by multi-party elections, some of which are shams of elections anyway, and you say that Africa is rising, it is doing so well since the fall of the Berlin Wall, when in fact there were only 3 countries that had a semblance of democracy. They were Mauritius, Botswana, and Gambia. Not Gambia under Yahya Jammeh, but Gambia then was under Jawara, who at a point in time schooled at Achimota School here in Ghana. So therefore, three by the fall of the Berlin Wall, and to the up to 25 African countries go to the polls every 4 years or 5 years. So I think it should offer us a glimmer of hope that politically we've been able to put our acts together. But we should go beyond self-reproach. Forget our intra-differences of tribalism, linguistic disparities, and all that. So that collectively we'll rise up as one people.
So we can veer off and cover. Botswana, as you were saying, they use this Cleota system, which is what we call a Noboa system over here in Ghana, you know, to bring the people. And then they have this peer kind of review. The peers judge their own. You can't do this, kind of. And their democracy is not the kind of democracy you see in Britain. And it's a quiet place, moving. Magai did a lot for the country. Rwanda, since he's veering off and not towing the British kind of democracy or American democracy, hey, he's a dictator. Come on, go to Rwanda and see. I love to go and stay in that country, right? The man is growing that type of democracy where everybody knows what to do. The man is leading from behind. And when you are a leader and you are leading from behind, it's more positive because the people know where they're going already. Yours is to make sure nobody, you know. But most African countries, the leaders lead from in front. Far in front. And those of us behind, we do whatever we want.
Yeah,
you know, kind of.
So, Nana, I think instead of adopting an either-or approach, it's either you drift to the west, where you to the left, you are entirely capitalist, or you drift to the right.
You guys raised this because my next question was, you know, Gaddafi and Mugabe. Yeah. You know, because anytime a leader arises and says, "Listen, I'm going to put my people in check," it doesn't matter how much development you bring. Every fault you do will be highlighted and blown out, and your own AU will not stand up and say, "No, hold on, we will deal with this."
Your AU is a toothless bulldog, Nana. You have an AU that couldn't set up its own headquarters. It had to get some fleets from another country elsewhere. So, Nana, right from the bottom, we've given the people the carte blanche to determine the trajectory of the development of the continent.
How is the AU funded at that?
How the AU is funded and all. So at a point in time, at all times, Nana, economically, the continent is tied to the apron strings of former colonial masters. So whoever comes with a new idea, if you are a new kid on the block with some idea that veers away from what they think is the ideal, no matter how well you are doing, Libya is close to being a failed state today. Sure. Libyans will bite their hands in fingers in future and regret that they violently toppled Gaddafi the way they did, because he was able to provide those rudimentary things they needed. Iraq as well. Iraq isn't looking any good as well. So therefore, I think, barring all our definitions for democracy, the rights of the people, the respect for human rights and all that, we should be given the opportunity to perhaps tow politically the West, but we should adopt economic modules that drift a little to the east if they will solve our problems. China has, established a very fruitful love relationship with the continent in the past decade. And some 10 years ago, the magnitude of trade between African countries and China stood at a paltry 11 billion, but today we are talking 166 billion. So therefore, economically, perhaps we can run to America. And Doc alluded to this fact. Obama has been a disappointment for us as black people. When he came, we felt like it was a harbinger of an opportunity for us to rise up from our doldrums. He came to Cairo, he gave a very rousing speech that he wanted to bridge the gap between the Muslim world and America, and then with Africa at large. But the man has not set foot here since he visited us when Mills was president. So the guy is facing myriad problems, both with Obamacare internally and a weak foreign policy he's pursuing in the Middle East and elsewhere. So he wants to use Africa as an opportunity to kind of have a good legacy.
I want to take a break and then I'll come back to Doctor, because I want to find out, why don't we go to the Chinese, since they are, they don't normally, give you too many sanctions. Just show me where the mines are, I'll go and dig it out and I'll give you your money. You can do whatever you want. Is it going to be a better option, or the West is staging? Hello, and the topic is Africa democracy and security. And whilst we're talking that, I'm also throwing a bit of the economy. And just before we went to the break, I just wanted to find out from Doctor if it would be good, if since we've decided not to do anything, should we tie our apron strings to the Chinese rather than the Americans?
Well, at times there is an adage which says, the devil you know is better than the angel you don't know. And I always say that an angel is an angel.
Whether you know him or not.
Whether you know him or not. So some people are advocating that. Why don't we tie our apron strings to the angel, the Chinese? But I think we need to do this with caution. The Chinese are no serious angels as angels per se. They have their own problems, their own economic problems. And each country, for their own economic security, would want to try and see how best they can either exploit or make sure that they get something from elsewhere. The Chinese have seen the enormous opportunities lying in Africa in terms of raw materials, especially the hydrocarbons, and also in other resources that they could tap in. And since they have a beef with the kind of international architecture that was put up in 1945. They have a beef with it because it doesn't favor them, just like the Russians do. They would always like China's rise has a certain focus. Make sure that that international architecture is broken or respects China. By that international architecture, I mean what we put in place in 1945. World Bank, IMF, UN, WTO. These are the 4 pillars of that new international architecture we put in place. You could see that the West has been able to eclipse these institutions and all that structure. So the Chinese, if you watch that, are leading seriously the BRICS, the formation of the BRICS. They want to float a bank. If that bank succeeds, I tell you, IMF, World Bank could go to hell. And so that fight means that you need also to help other areas which will support you in that fight. If you watch out, America is now very, very wary of Chinese rise. And always they fighting China in one way or the other, but either it's democracy or some islands somewhere or supporting Japan against China and that kind of thing. And China is bent on making sure that the BRICS succeed. So if you look at these issues, then you've got to be very careful why you say you tie your apron strings, because the Chinese would want to help you because they think you can help them. They think they can help you because they are helping themselves one way or the other. What I would have loved to see is an Africa already united one way or the other. We have African policies. Look at the EU. Cameron just gets up to say that Ghana must draw whatever, what do you call it? Gay laws or else. Then the whole of the West started talking the same language, kind of. If it is non-tariff barriers they want to impose, easy. Agric products, they say this one can come, this one cannot come. They have a common agricultural policy. They have this industrial policy. They have China policy. EU has China policy, US policy. So it's a common policy and no one can come in to exploit. But since we don't have that, if China is cheating Ghana and we quarrel with China, China can go to Togo. Go and do the same thing. Move to Benin. We need to be wary of how we, I wouldn't call it tie our apron strings. I don't like that phrase. We need to engage China. And I have always said that, and I've told some ministers, my French ministers in the past and present, do not go to China. Bring China in. To which, what I mean is, if you are going to buy bicycles from China, tractors from China, and you are buying them often and often, why don't you entice the Chinese? They don't have space. Why don't you entice them to come and build up a manufacturing kind of factory here? Look at this toothpick. Look at the amount of toothpick. If you go to Senegal, it is Chinese toothpick. Kenya, Chinese. I've traveled to all these places and everything China. If Ghana can entice China to Ghana, and toothpick is produced here in Accra or whatever, Ghana, and it becomes the hub from where, all toothpick are imported, it helps the Ghanaian economy, rather than allowing Ghanaians to go and bring toothpick. So our engagement with China is what I would advocate, not tying our apron strings to China. Then you incur the displeasure of the West and all kinds of things. Let us engage China positively. by bringing them in.
And then, Nana, I think apart from the banking sector, where there are subsidiaries, there are main, headquarters elsewhere in foreign capitals, but then there are subsidiaries here. Apart from that, you can't find any kind of manufacturing thing. Just as the doctor has indicated. So I think we should be able to sit around the negotiation table, having the right, bargaining power, so that we bargain from a position of strength rather than from a position of weakness.
Won't it be tough? I mean, as far as industrialization, I mean, because you don't have energy, I mean, where is your strength to bargain?
Yeah, exactly. That's a huge deficit, Nana. That is why I think in our engagement, I like the word Doc said we should be using. We shouldn't tie our aprons straight. In our engagement with them, Nana, let's not have quick fixes. It's all about Cuba in a period of 5 years, train doctors for us. The U.S., let's plan in the long term, Nana. Let's give our industry the needed fodder to be able to function. So at the end of the day, some 30 years from now, we'll be independent. So instead of importing these things and incurring huge tariffs, at the end of the day, we'll be able to make them here.
Yeah, but you see, we've talked about this thing before, but why, why must we by all means deal with the West? I mean, is there not a big economy within so we can deal within? I mean, I'm sure Africa can build a wall around it and still live.
Excuse me, let me just 1 second. See, economics is a funny kind of game. The pull and push factors. Now, supposing within the West African sub-region, Ghana stands out if we have power supply, water supply, land banks, land acquisition is not a problem. These are pull factors that will pull in any foreign direct investor into the country. So why would you waste time not creating the enabling environment for FDI to come in? Then you wouldn't even ask whether he's coming from the West or the East. The only thing is that Western giants would like to see some other things. Democracy, this, blah, blah, blah.
But the real bait is
exactly.
there.
The real bait is there. So if I were governments in Africa, create the enabling environment, you yourself not being corrupt, you looking at it. Because both Chinese and, look, let's not make a mistake, that the Chinese, the world is corrupt. They can corrupt your officials to the extent that they will give them things that are, useless for the community. But if you are not corrupted, you're a good leader, you know what you want, you could still bring either China or whatever. Nkrumah showed it. Why should Kaiser engineers be the ones to build X and Y and that kind of thing? He went for them. Went for loans from the US, building the Akosombo Dam left and right. He made them see that, look, it is a good thing. Kaiser engineers, you can come in. But the Chinese, you can come in. The Russians were building this. Everybody was coming in because Ghana was growing. This is the time African leaders must do that. Create the enabling environment for the people who want returns on their money to rush in. Rather than you go to China, they give you some plane. They say, oh, the Embraer, this is free for you for the time being. The next time, or the Americans gave us some 4 boats, some Pintumamento kind of boats for the Navy, and we are happy. The next time, if you want to buy a boat, you have to go to them. It doesn't work that way. Create the enabling environment, and they themselves will rush in with respect, serious respect.
And then I agree with Doc perfectly. The creation of that enabling environment cannot happen in a vacuum. Yeah. You should invest in human resource.
Exactly.
And then you should keep up with the Joneses. Without technology, you could have all the finest human resources on this continent. But at the end of the day, you will not be able to do anything as a country. So first of all, invest more in us, the young people. I don't know whether I have the qualification to speak for the young people.
Hold on there. There are 7 countries that the world is watching. Big economies in the world are talking about that. And Vietnam leads that slot because of what Ebad has just said. They are investing in the people, investing in technology, investing in skills, and they are investing in those things that will attract foreign direct investors. So Japanese are there fighting Americans. Can you believe that? For a place in the sun there in Vietnam. That's what he's leading to, and that's what he's supporting.
Yeah, so, Nana, I always say that we are sitting on a gold mine as a continent, but if we don't get our act together, at the end of the day, we'll be moving around in circles.
I mean, so it comes down to a bit of education before I move away. And we are still not, we limited education. I mean, if I take Ghana, education is now enrollment. Well, education is now schooling, and schooling is now enrollment. I mean, that's how we've broken it. We've broken education into the fact that you went to a classroom, and we've broken the fact that in a classroom that you turned up. But as to what comes out of it, you know.
And then that's, I think, the older generations like Doc have been within the system for quite some decades. But Nana, the fact that when we transmogrified from BEC, SSC to WASI, I anticipated that we would give biting teeth to technical and vocational education. Sure. Because the only graduates that can feed industry are people who have the technical acumen. Sure. But today, those who are leading the charge in terms of the burgeoning economy across Africa are those in the, sorry to say, the soft sciences, the humanities and all that. If you are a mechanic, then you are not up to speed with the kind of IQ people are talking about. Therefore, I think we should go back to the drawing boards. Let's take it from where Nkrumah and others left off. I have my own reservations about Nkrumah's persona. The fact that he wanted to be, you know, the big guy and then didn't want to compromise on sharing power and all that. But for him to have had that clear-cut vision, and he was a man of his own, and regardless of where he was siphoning or tapping the resources from, he had his eyes on the goal.
Let's stay on the Nkrumah thing. Is that not what Africa needs? Somebody who stays there longer to develop. We don't have the time to be doing that 4-year cycle. It's too distracting.
Nana, Malaysia and Ghana gained independence pretty much under the same economic conditions. But because they had one party with one person at the helm of affairs for about 2 decades, they were able to have a clear-cut vision for the country.
I thought you said you were against that.
No, I am against longevity without vision, which we have seen in certain countries. For example, Uncle Mugabe, perhaps he's been president for about 30 years now, but for maybe he will not have that vision and that insight to lead the country. But in our case, Nkrumah was visionary, and everybody accepts that. But for the fact that Nkrumah was found, you know, power sharing a non-negotiable thing, it was a no-go area. Certainly, you couldn't have been president for long, unless maybe he was a king.
Let me bring Doc in here on this subject. Doc, is that not what we need today? And, you know, I do Red Fridays, and everybody says, you want a regime change? I said, no, I want a system change. Because with this system, even if you brought Jesus Christ, how many miracles can he perform in 4 years?
He can walk on water anyway.
On water anyway. You know? Yes, I love that. You know, I don't want to go into the debate about Nkrumah. People say Nkrumah or CPP. But the main point is this. The fact of the matter is this. It's not a question of longevity. The Queen has been there for how many years? That he's saying. Not longevity. But creating systems so that when the person is... Because longevity, the person can come to power today and die tomorrow. So, and can stay on for 100 years also, if God permits. So if you create a system that is capable of repairing itself and moving forward, so it can be change and continuity. Change and continuity. That is a system we all have to look at. But whether you want to share power or you don't want to share power depends on the circumstances, the historical circumstances around the time. Let's not make a mistake. During Nkrumah's time, it was a fashion. Almost all countries that got independence went the socialist way. But the socialist economies were doing well. Russia was doing 12% per annum, while the other economies were dwindling. And so it was a fashion. And as a fashion, that was the headwaters of development economics. And you have said Atta Lewis and others. They were all advising Nkrumah left, right, center. That's the first time that almost all countries that got independence got ministries of finance and economic planning. It was not there in the world. So planning. So if you set up a good system, the world is such that nothing stays static. If you love dialectics like I do. So Nkrumah would have gone. Something would have, the world system would have changed him or changed the system. So I don't believe in just longevity for longevity's sake. What system have you set in place that is capable of, you know, like a locomotive, capable of
running itself?
Exactly. See, that's my beef also with somebody like Gaddafi. What was the system in place so that without Gaddafi, the vision continues? Without Mugabe, the vision continues. If you don't set up such a system, that is one you want to stay on like Mugabe 89, still wanting to run office. You understand? So what Africa needs is not just longevity. We need visionary leaders that set up systems that are workable, in fact, workable systems. Systems that produce results and systems that the population will allude to. It's like They are part of the making of the system. If we have that in Africa, unfortunately, since we want to just satisfy democracy, a la France or a la America, or we just, we voted in Ghana, whatever it is, we said small children voted, whatever. Nobody cares about that. For the West, somebody won, somebody lost. That is democracy. For me, that's not democracy. What I mean by democracy is my democracy with those things that resemble the West, plus good governance. That means truth, non-corruption, prudence in economic governance, you know, and the people get what they need, not what they want. Coming back to your education, when we have such a system that I'm talking about, it tells you what kind of education you can have, because it is the economy that should direct the educational system. Unfortunately, our economy and our educational system are running parallel like railway lines. They don't meet. There's no tangent there, you know, where they say they will meet somewhere. So education, I'm an educationist. If I'm teaching philosophy, geography, history, I'm teaching geography the way geography should be taught. There's nothing like Ghana geography. But if the system is demanding oil, whatever it is, then you will see that somebody is doing geography, but you would need some. So there will be more pull. The pull factors will push the person towards some. The economy must bring the demand. But we are running an educational system. You can get a PhD in Ghana and you are still useless to the economy.
Yeah. So I think the watchword is the idiosyncrasies of all countries.
Exactly.
You should look at what you need. Industry is crying for, you know, people to. That is where you should, you know, concentrate marshal the needed resources and concentrate at every point.
And the politicians are telling, oh, we have raised the capitation grant from 180 to 220. Oh, well, I'll give you free education now.
And we are content with
We are
that.
content with these things. I mean,
specialized education.
You know, absolutely. Even if you give me free education to a PhD level and I don't get employment in the system, what have you done to me? Oh, we have built, since we came, we have built 200 and something SSS. The question we should ask a government who tells me this is, so what?
It's not about quantity, but it's about quality. And at every point in time, I know people talk macroeconomics and all the fiscal jargons, but what I understand is, for as long as you know that there is a need, you should be able to provide that supply. So that we have specialized senior high schools. So we don't all toe the same line. At the end of the day, you churn out some 150,000 SHS students annually. And then they go to the university.
25,000 only, of which enter the university.
So you see, so it's a pyramid. The higher they get, the slimmer it becomes at the end of the day.
At the AU, you know, I mean, all these things you're saying here is not a big secret. I just want to find out, what is the fear in knowing that there is more than enough to go around? I mean, there's way more than enough. I mean, we have enough to feed the whole world, let alone just us. So what is that fear that African leaders can say, you know something, let me spread the wealth and let everybody, why is it all grab, 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 and then we all stand still? Stay tuned. Hello, and Africa, democracy, security, and the economy, but security is part of it. And if security is part of it, let's talk to Dr. Kwesi Aden, who obviously is a security expert. And I just want to find out how the continent is unable to protect itself unless we look outside again. For France, for Britain, for America to come to our aid. If there's a coup d'etat in Mali, there's nothing we can do unless they come to help us. Is this something that we can turn around? Doc, you're welcome to the show. Hello?
Hello?
Doctor, you're welcome to the show.
Well, thank you very much.
I have your brother here, Dr. Vladimir Nchi.
Vladimir, long time. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Kwesi.
It's Joy FM that happens to bring us together.
You know?
And I also have Ibad Ibrahim here.
Okay, sounds good.
Yes. Doc,
We're
trying to find out, as a continent in Africa, you know, if there's an insurgency in Mali, we just sit and wait for, you know, our Western powers to come and help us. I mean, is there anything we can do internally to protect ourselves, or it's impossible?
No, I think it's possible to protect ourselves if we've got the political backbone to make the rather tough ethical decision between sort of equipping our forces to be able to respond creditably and then making a balance with our development agenda. Now, I haven't followed the earlier conversation, but certainly both go hand in hand, development and security. Unfortunately, and I'm sure here Vladimir will agree with me, we've left the space for people to determine for us what our critical security needs are and how best we need to respond. I mean, I don't know how often my colleagues and brothers in your studio and myself have been requested to put our ideas in a piece of paper, not more than 3 pages, as an input into the decision-making process around what our core security priorities are and suggestions and recommendations as to what the response mechanism should be. But we can protect ourselves, and I think we've got the men and women with the capabilities and capacity to do that if we had the political will to stretch out our own hands and to say, how can you make a contribution to this conversation?
Dr. Kwame, I'll find out. I mean, at present, what's the most, what's our security threat the most as a continent now?
I mean, I don't want to give you just a tall list of what the critical security threats are. But certainly, if I were to make a hierarchy of sorts, 1 to 5, the environment is a problem. The youth bulge is certainly a problem. Increasing radicalization, whether politics, religion, social issues leading to radicalization of our citizens. The third is a certain unknown lack of recognition that the security environment has changed, and therefore the way we train, prepare, the statutes of security, doctrine, intelligence must also change. I think for me, the final thing relates to the political world. There's a certain ad hoc to the political discourses around security, around response, around equipping those who constitutionally are mandated to support us. And I think a very classic example is our responses to Boko Haram, to Mali, and to the Ebola virus.
I was wondering, I mean, we have AU, where, you know, all African nations coming together as one giant force. And, you know, all together, we don't even have one, you know, jumbo jet that can ferry, you know, soldiers in case there's an insurgency anywhere to go there. And I'm thinking, is this something beyond the AU, or is this something that by now we should have, you know, one aircraft carrier, not aircraft carrier, but, you know, an airplane that, you know, ships soldiers from one country to the other to go and help them? Is there something beyond the AU?
No, far from it. Far from it. I mean, I think once more it relates to the political will. And there are multiple funding sources that the AU can tap into. So, I mean, let me just take 2 minutes to do a very Russian desk job, you know, what I call a Hobbesian interpretation of what it is. Short, nasty, and very British. Sure. If you take the assessed contribution of AU member states and the willingness of the member states to pay their assessed contributions to get the organization to run, until recently, only 5 member countries paid optimally. Nigeria, South Africa, Libya, Algeria, and Egypt. Ghana was number 6, and we're very consistent in paying our contributions. That is number 1. Number 2 is that if you take the framework that should ensure that Africa is responsive to security, so that is African Standard Force, that force is almost 85% funded by external sources. Bottom line, if you don't put your money where your mouth is, then you're not really ready to eat. The third is a characteristic of this continent. We start by establishing an African Standby Force with 5 regional brigades, and then some of the external powers come in and say, why don't you establish an African Rapid Contingency Force? So now we have 2 concurrent forces, one that is supposed to be a rapid deployment force, that is the accurate, and then the African Standby Force. Now, the mushrooming of initiative contributes to what you correctly captured as lack of an air transport access. But probably let me make a play on your word. Is it possible that we can pull together the transport facility and subcontract as an effective way of transporting? And I think once more, Mali and the transition from AFISMA to LUSMA demonstrated this lack of capability. Added to that was the Guinea-Bissau crisis in 2012, in which most of the powerful countries on this continent had to, take an air transport from Niger. So it raises very critical, disturbing issues about the levels of preparedness to protect ourselves. And I think because of that, we are seeing a re-emergence of sort of third-rate powers in Europe now beginning to flex their muscles on this continent. I mean, particularly the United Kingdom and France. I mean, France has become, in the aftermath of America's decision to lead from behind. I mean, whatever that is. We are seeing a resurgent France. Libya, Mali, Cote d'Ivoire, Chad, Central African Republic, and it raises very difficult, critical, painful questions as to where we want to go and whether there's a recognition of this.
Doc, if you hold on for me and I'll bring Dr. Vladimir in here. Ibad always says this, that if you won't spend on your security, then what else would you spend on? I mean, that's your security. I mean, that's your life. So if you're not going to spend to protect yourself, what would you spend on?
But, well, just like Kwesi said, and said rightly, that the security thinking or the environment has changed. And therefore, you need also to change your focus. You can have, in fact, in Africa, we have always had what we call regime security, ensuring that there is no coup. But ensuring that those things that bring about coups are no longer there, we don't think about. But today, what is important is what he's talking about, the environment. Environmental security is very, very important because that is where all your economic, whatever it is coming from. The youth bulge in Africa, right? A greater percentage, in fact, what happened in the Arab Spring is because of the youth bulge. They're walking about without employment. You have the problem of gun running, what I call this kind of transnational crimes, and that is what is happening in Mali and other places. Put it all together and come to governance as a security issue. But bad governance is more of a security issue than any other thing. And bad governance engulfs all that I've earlier even said. So the security environment has changed. So you must pay for the security to ensure that there is stability. Where there is stability, democracy thrives, the economy grows, and there is development. So whether we like it or not, Africa has to pay for its security, has to ensure its security in all the dimensions that we have mentioned. Nowadays, they call it human security, because after all, the insecurity that comes about through wars and whatnot creates conditions for the human beings not to be able to cater for their own countries, and governments lose territories. So yes, we need to do a lot in Africa to be able to ensure our own security, which we are not doing much. One of the outcomes of the U.S.-Africa Summit is the support that they want to give to the Africa Peacekeeping Rapid Response Partnership, where 6 countries are involved, 2 in West Africa, Ghana and Senegal, and 4 in East Africa. You ask yourself, why? Fine. They are always doing things, the Akota, the ACRI, and all those responses that they have, the Pan-Sahel responses, which they are helping us with. Inures to their benefit too. Because if you leave the Sahel region to be a place of Al-Qaeda platform, where are they training towards? Not towards Ghana, but to them. So one way or the other, these are issues we need to tackle very much and foremost in our political dispensations.
Dr. Kwesi Edding.
Yeah.
I put ignorance on my list. I mean, is that also part of our security threat? Because I think we're just becoming a bunch of ignorant people.
No, far from it.
I see.
Far from it. I mean, look, I've worked in a precise military institutions for quite several years. And you meet some of the finest thinkers. And I will go back to Vladimir's point about governance. I think once more, what you term as probably ignorance, just for the fun of it, really I will call the lack of the appropriate structures for the governance of our state. I mean, all those structures are there, from the parliament to the different councils for the security service. It is the willingness of the political class to enable those governance structures to bring the technical expertise onto the table and for a dispassionate apolitical decision-making process to be made looking at the merits of the case that has been presented. So you look at the role of the different forces in Mali, for example, and you realize that for the ECOWAS technical team that presented their paperwork, that the technical specifications were solid. Now, these are always subjected to political calculus or calculations, and I'm quite unhappy to say this, but more often than not, the decisions are not the most satisfactory. And I think that is one of the reasons why there seems to be this lacuna about what is Africa's interest. And I think once more, I agree with Vladimir when he expresses this frustration about the multiplicity of interventions that our partners are way too happy to support. Because first, it weakens our own resolve and common front and allows them to play games. You see, because if you look at the international response, or particularly the U.S. response to terrorism on this continent post, or before and post 9/11, you would realize this panoply of intervention strategies. Okay, from ACRI to ACOTA to the Pan-Sahel Initiative to the Pan-Saharan Counter-Terrorism Initiative. And you wonder to yourself, and now to Africa, what have been the net benefit of all this multiplicity of competing and sometimes undermining interventions for this continent? And that comes back to my earlier discourse about the need for knowledge generation as an input into the decision-making process. You see, because if you have people who spend all their time doing nothing than studying consistently the changing dynamics, the environmental security dynamics, and how both internal and external inputs or influences continue to shift and change these dynamics, then it would be nice to call a man like Vladimir and say, Chief, can you do us something and provide some options for us? We will study it, and then we will call you to come and defend your proposal.
So, thank you.
It is that engagement. You see, that sense of collective buy-in that I think some of us are arguing for and looking for. Because when the U.S. decides to do what it does with Africa, and Vladimir will tell you, it was a long-running debate domestically within the U.S.
Thank
that
you.
brought up what we now see. And I think the appeal that we are making, and when we talk about the governance as a security issue and as a potential threat if it's not done well, is that we need a more engaged, open, transparent process. But let me say this, however.
Doc, if you round the up for me.
And a half, things have improved.
Oh, thank you very much. Thank you very much. Ivan, let me give you the last one on security.
Nana, I think the elderly colleagues have been listening for the past 10 minutes here. I'm still, drawing from the pool of wisdom from the elderly colleagues. I just want to say that we should get our priorities right. Our security cannot be like the security architecture of the United States or France or the UK. They have their own imperialistic undertones, why they intervene, where they do. So therefore, as a people, we should be able to put our acts together. And I keep saying it, and I will reiterate it here, Nana. You don't fight insurgencies and instability on the battlefield alone. You start from the shanty towns, solve the issues of youth unemployment, solve the issues of marginalization and all that. So the best way to fight instability is by denying it that conducive environment it so desperately needs to thrive. So as a continent, if we're able to do that, because, Nana, war is a very expensive business. I'll mention this en passant. currently there is a tentative truce between Hamas and Israel, but perhaps it will unravel in the next 72 hours. The Israelis have had to invest so much in Iron Dome batteries, and any counter missile is shot to intercept any rocket from Hamas in the Gaza Strip costs not less than $50,000. And Hamas has shot over 1,000 in the past 1 month alone. So when you do the mathematics, you realize that as a continent, whether in the form of AU or a regional bloc like ECOWAS, we don't have the wherewithal to carry out the kind of onslaughts other well-equipped and well-funded countries across the world are doing. So let's keep our ambitions small, solve our own idiosyncratic problems so that we don't allow things to snowball out of proportion and to elicit any military intervention from our former colonial masters.
Thank you very much, Doctor. Thank you very much, Ibad. And folks, as I always say, thank you for watching, and tomorrow we'll be back to do it all over again. Thanks for watching.